Hey everybody at ACME, this is Father James. I told you yesterday on my videos for the photo editing that I would do like a little telescope purchasing breakdown. But then it kind of dawned on me because I was actually going to have that be a part of my original presentation, and being that I kind of did, as I shared with you, an amalgamation of my homily from the closing mass and the presentation, I thought, why don't I just give you the presentation again as planned that I was going to do? And it might be a little bit of repeat, but in that will be some of the telescope, what gear should you buy type of thing, because I always like to do that for people interested in astrophotography. So, for the sake, we can skip through this pretty quick. You already know who I am and who I'm not. We took care of that in my presentation. One thing I felt a little bummed out that I feel like I didn't make quite clear, that with my book, I was going to encourage you to look up the reflections I did on the presentations you'll have and pray with them. But that actually might be, in the spirit of Ignatian prayer, a nice little repetition for when you get home to, as you go through my book, take out your notebook that I encouraged you to do some writing on, and then that way you can then start creating your own narratives spiritually for what you experienced. As I mentioned before in the first talk, the two proposed new works of mercy for Pope Francis's spiritual and corporal work of mercy. This has been a week of contemplating God's creation and also potentially a little discussion about care for God's creation. And what happens when we contemplate God's creation? This is the part where I kind of rush through. For me, contemplating God's creation has become a part of my prayer life. It's not the only part of my prayer life. I do Eucharistic adoration, I do Liturgy of the Hours, I do Lectio Divina, but there's something that has enriched my prayer life by taking up Pope Francis's encouragement to develop this sense of contemplation of creation that really has brought me a depth to my prayer life. And over the Chippewa River, here is our comet Neowise. And in 2020, that time that was very scary for all of us, a time where I would not have blamed anybody for interpreting Comet Neowise as some type of messenger of doom, as we were all living in shutdown. The nights, as I shared with you, when I would pray and contemplate creation, I actually found peace and joy. Seeing something new in the night sky. I always wanted to see a comet, and with long exposure photography, 10-second captures, I was able to see that comet anew. Peace. I would often pray a rosary along the Chippewa River. Obviously, I couldn't do the Liturgy of the Hours to keep my night vision, but to have my rosary on hand and to just do simple prayer practices to enjoy the sound of the river as it would flow by and just enjoy the comet in the sky. And as I shared that too, I also experienced some melancholy. I didn't want the nights to end, but I also had those melancholic reflections of, where are we going? What is our future going to be? The total solar eclipse in Bloomington, Indiana. Again, this is a picture that I captured of the total solar eclipse. As I said, being I was a presenter, I incurred a little bit of stress on just that always comes when you feel the responsibility of presenting for a group. You want the group to gain a lot out of your presentations, but a lot of joy. I met up with old friends, seeing Brother Guy, seeing Brenda Fry, and seeing Chris Graney, and people that I've come to know through working in collaboration with the Vatican Observatory Foundation. Just really brought great joy, and almost a family reunion type of feel. The wonder, listening to the birds and their nesting song, the crisping of the shadows, the slight disorientation and happiness that came through the process of the eclipse, too, is something that I often think of experientially as just unique moments that were so different I mean, I've heard birds nesting songs before, but to hear them in midday was an interesting change of, and again, in that sense of liturgical progression of creation, of to hear that happen at an unusual time, we really created that sense of sacred time. And then just the satisfaction of helping others enjoy a lifetime experience along with me. Now, when we take a look at Aurora, you know, when I would look through, I've been very blessed these past couple of years that with the sun approaching solar maximum, I live in a part of Wisconsin where we're just north enough where you can really enjoy the aurora. And when I see the northern lights, when I see the aurora, and I've taken time just to, again, contemplate God's creation and have that sense of soaking in what God is trying to show to me, I would find joy just seeing it like clouds. I oftentimes would kind of wonder if there might be a farmer who has been working all day, doesn't know that there's an aurora coming, looking up and thinking, that darn weatherman, they told me it was supposed to be a clear night, and where all these clouds come from? Because that's how thick they were, that's how dense and how luminous the skies were with those aurora. And it was just such a joy just to see them. And actually, with naked eye, to be able to see the greens and reds faintly, but that just gave me that sense of peace and marveling at God's creation. And also, too, there's just getting the images that I got, as I'll show you in a minute, just having the satisfaction of, I've always wanted to take these type of pictures, but also to have that picture now, as I've mentioned to you, as a visio divina, a visual icon of God's fingerprints, to be able to have those images is to me something that I can, again, in the spirit of Ignatian repetition, where St. Ignatius encourages us to go back to spiritual exercises that spoke deeply to us. I have those now with me. This quote from the writings of John Muir spoke loud to me. If you haven't figured out, I have a soft spot in my heart for John Muir, given his Wisconsin ties, but the more I read him, the more I feel that he was, as I shared in my presentation, was Catholic and didn't realize it. And when he was sharing one of the better moments with his father, Muir shares, the winter stars far surpass those of our stormy Scotland in brightness. And we gazed and gazed as though we had never seen stars before. Oftentimes the heavens were made still more glorious by auroras, the long lace rays called merry dancers in Scotland, streaming with of a startling, tremulous motion to their zenith. Usually the electric aurora light is white or pale yellow, but in the third or fourth of our Wisconsin winters, there was a magnificent colored aurora that was seen and admired over nearly all the continent. The whole sky was draped in gracious purple and crimson folds, glorious beyond description. Father called out into the yard in front of the house, where he had a wide view, crying, "Come, come, mother! Come, bairns, and see the glory of God. All the sky is clad in a robe of red light. Look straight up at the crown where the folds are gathered. Hush and wonder and adore, for surely this is the clothing of the Lord himself, and perhaps he will even now appear looking down from his high heaven." The celestial show was far more glorious than anything we had ever yet beheld, and throughout that wonderful winter hardly anything else was spoken of. And to me, when I read that passage, there can be a moment of nostalgia, like, man, when the skies were so clear, what must have that looked like? And then I experienced this aurora. If you look down, there's a farm, the barn house. You can see some of the farm lights off in the distance. And now, from a photography standpoint, some of the photographers that I know would be like, oh, you should have gotten closer to the barn, make it more prominent in the image. But for me, I love this image because when I look at the greens, the reds, the folds, the light, I just can't help but think of the Muir family standing out with the dad just in almost a raptured awe, wondering if the Lord would appear that night. Now, did my naked eye see this exactly the way this is? No. This is a time lapse, or not time lapse, but a long 10-second exposure. Again, 10 seconds is kind of my honey hole I found for these type of exposures to capture enough light and also some editing to emphasize the colors. But when I look at this, even though it's a little bit overemphasized from the experience I see looking at this picture can be the same in prayer. And I would encourage you to develop those type of celestial icons in your life. So, as I shared with you before, faith and science are really best seen as dialogue partners. Again, they're not quasi deities dueling with each other, but they're things that we do. And I explained with you St. Bonaventure's 3 levels of ascent, so I won't spend much time with this since that's something we already discussed. And here's the section that I kind of glossed over. I wish I could have given a little bit more time to, but there is sadly within the Christian world and the Catholic world still a confusion about the relationship between faith and science that I find. And starting with Catechism paragraph 159, we can clearly see if we look to the end of that first paragraph, God cannot deny himself, nor can truth ever contradict truth. Consequently, methodological research, methodical research, I can't speak this morning, it must be some of the painkillers, in all branches of knowledge, provided it is carried out in a truly scientific manner and does not override moral laws, can never conflict with faith, because the things of the world and the things of faith derive from the same God. And so, therefore, going back, sometimes people think, is it faith versus science? I'm much more of a person that thinks we should do faith and we should do science. It's part of our human experience. It's not something outside of us, it's something within us. And here I just wanted to put together for you some statements from our previous popes on evolution, just to kind of show once again when we hit that, does the Catholic Church support science? Does the Catholic Church support evolution? I'll let you read this on your own. But Pius XII starting out this whole idea when, the science of evolution was hotly debated in his time, that, as long as we're just talking about the material aspect of who we are, there's nothing against Scripture about speaking of us coming from our bodies and originating from pre-existing matter. In fact, this second creation story in Genesis, is that not the whole point? God takes clay and breathes into the life of this clay, a human person. So even though it's, obviously that's not the same as evolution, the idea that we came from something else is not foreign to Scripture, and we shouldn't be afraid of such things. This is John Paul II's famous quote commenting on Pius XII's original statement when he spoke that evolution is more than a hypothesis, and that for us as people of faith that we should see it as such. And then this is arguably my favorite quote from Benedict XVI, as you know from my book. I really kind of consider Benedict XVI a type of intellectual and spiritual father. Even though he and I's liturgical senses may differ, his writings always resonated deeply with me. And I found this quote on a question and answer he gave for a clergy retreat in Germany when they were asking about faith and science. And this is the quote. Now, the ... dots you see aren't taking out essential data, it's just kind of tightening it up so it could fit the slide. Currently, I see a somewhat fierce debate raging between so-called creationism and evolutionism, presented as though they were mutually exclusive alternatives. Those who believe in the Creator would not be able to conceive of evolution, and those who indeed support evolution would have to exclude God. This antithesis is absurd. I want to read that again. This antithesis is absurd because, on the one hand, there are so many scientific proofs in favor of evolution, which appears to be a reality we can see and which enriches our knowledge of life and of being such. The doctrine of evolution does not answer every question, especially the great philosophical question: where does everything come from? And how did everything start which ultimately led to man? I believe this is of the utmost importance. And that's where we get into the whole aspect of science oftentimes asks, this is how certain things we can understand mechanically come about. But that why question, the meaning questions, science is not equipped to answer those questions. So of all the quotes, this is probably my favorite one. One, because I think it's more of a relaxed statement, just because it was part of a Q&A of a clergy retreat. But as usual, Benedict always displays his deep intellectual depth. Pope Francis then, of course, too, made his contribution to these thoughts, not only on evolution, but on the Big Bang. And so I'll just focus on the Big Bang era part of this. The Big Bang theory, which is proposed today as the origin of the world, does not contradict the intervention of a divine creator, but depends on it. Evolution in nature does not conflict with the notion of creation, because evolution presupposes the creation of beings who evolve. So we can, and also too, here we have a picture of Brother Guy and Pope Leo. If I was at Arizona, I was going to jokingly turn to Brother Guy and say, "Oh, is this when Pope Leo fired you as director of the Vatican Observatory?" But his term ended. There was no firing, so that was just going to be a fun little jab that I was going to throw in. But when I love this statement that Pope Leo made about the James Webb Space Telescope. The James Webb Space Telescope science team has worked hard to make these images available to the general public, for which all of us can be grateful. In a special way, though, all of you who are taking part in the summer school, he was addressing the students of the Vatican Observatory Summer School Astrophysics program, have been given the knowledge and training that can enable you to use this amazing instrument in order to expand our knowledge of the cosmos, of which we are a tiny but meaningful part. And how beautiful it is in an era that presumes this huge fight between faith and science, that we have a Holy Father that is telling scientists, both scientists who may have deep faith in God and some that don't, use your gifts to share what you know with the world. And that is the Catholic intuition. We believe faith and reason. They're the two wings that the human heart ascends to truth on. And with that ascent, the sciences become part of that branch of reason, part of that wing, one of the feathers of that wing that is so needed for us. So therefore, I was going to do just a little, before we go stargazing and that kind of stuff, what we want to see. So this is an image I took of the Orion Nebula and the Running Man Nebula a while back, heavily edited. This is what we want to see when we look through a telescope. What did you see? Well, you probably saw something akin to this. But the thing that I want to point out is, it might be easy just to rush to the presumption of, oh, astrophotography is much more interesting because this image is much more interesting than that image. But one thing I wanted to point out, if you notice in the middle of, and I'm sure that some of the telescope people, as you've been looking at this, are pointing out, a very small star cluster called the Trapeziid in the Orion Nebula. Those three small stars. Now, I don't have a pointer function on here, Actually, oh, here I can use my pointer. I'm not talking about these three stars. These three stars, the trapezoid, three bright stars that, for the us to look at, you can see distinctly in a good telescope. You can't see just naked eye. Where is that trapezoid in this image? You might think, gosh, I have no idea. It's in here, but you can't see it. One of the biggest challenges for people who take pictures of the Orion Nebula is to try to preserve the trapezoid because they're so bright. It is very difficult to get the right balance to pull out all the gas clouds, but also to maintain the trapezoid. So I like to use these images to show that one is not better than the other. They both can do different things. But before we rush to the presumption that astrophotography is better because we can get so much more information, you can also see things through observational uh, with astronomy, with a telescope, that is very difficult to be able to reproduce in regard to astrophotography. So I really hope that you remember that moving forward, that it's telescopes and astrophotography, in my opinion, it's the great Catholic both and. I'm always going to be doing observation with a telescope. I'm always going, being that I've learned how to do some astrophotography, I'm always going to want to do some astrophotography. Both of them used together can bring about different things for us to look at. You probably looked a lot at this area here. Up here is two of the three stars of Orion's belt. Up here is you can't see it with the naked eye, but the Flame Nebula, and faintly the Horsehead Nebula nestled here. And then, of course, what we were just looking at with the Orion Nebula and the Running Man Nebula in the belt of Orion. You probably looked at the Andromeda Galaxy. Again, you probably just saw the core that through a telescope looked more like a little fuzzball. But again, through astrophotography, we can start, in very simple astrophotography, we can start to gain data that can recreate an image. And to think that this is actually takes up more space than the moon in the night sky, but all our eyes can see, naked eyes, that little fuzzball. That is, again, one of those neat things for us where the two observational and astrophotography can work together. I was going to show you just some star charts in my presentation. Here was the east star, or excuse me, the east and southeast skies that you were observing this week. East to southeast and the different objects. Um, at this point, this might be kind of, I don't know, maybe a little bit of your Visio Divina roadmap to kind of remind you of the different things that you may have viewed. Sadly, the West was less interesting this time, fewer things out, but then straight above you, you could see a lot of things like, the Andromeda Galaxy. I'm sure you spent, I don't know, maybe you tried to get a peek at the Triangulum Galaxy. That's a hard one to get with a visual astronomy, but I hope whatever you gazed at this week has really enriched your week. So now, when you're like, all right, Father, you sold me. I don't have any astrophotography gear. I want to get into taking pictures of the night sky. What gear should I buy? And there's an old saying in any type of photography: the gear that you will actually use is the gear that you should buy. Now, the hard part about that is, though, that, well, unless you try it, you're not going to know if you like it or not. So, before you even think about buying anything, here are some questions I'd encourage you to think about. How much time do you have to dedicate to astrophotography? This, to me, is one of the most important questions before buying any kind of gear. If you are to get like a major telescope setup with like a monochrome camera and filters, that takes a lot of fiddling and a lot of time to set up in your backyard or in a dark sky place. For me as a priest, if I can squeak out a couple hours, a couple nights a week, if the skies cooperate, that's all I can give. I don't have the time to buy gear that I'm going to have a half hour to an hour of setup time, because I'd rather have gear that's simple that I can start to use right away. Now, does that mean I'm going to sacrifice some quality with images? Yes, it does. Uh, the more fiddly gears can produce far better images. But if all you're trying to do is maybe share some things on social media, or maybe like print out on a little, I was gonna bring my little Canon selfie printer with me that does dye sublimation 5x7 prints. If you're just going to do that in like a little scrapbook of the things you take pictures of, you'd be amazed at how just simple little things can be used to take astrophotography images to create a nice little notebook for you to reflect with. What is your patience level? if you Astronomy is a test of your patience when you get into astrophotography. If your patience level is short, I would encourage you, you pretty much just said, Father, all I need is a smart telescope. If you have high patience, then you can get into building a rig, is what they would call it, of getting a telescope and a tracking mount and a camera and so forth. But if your patience level is low, forget about it. What type of images do you want to achieve? If you want to have nebulas, kind of those big star clouds, you're going to want to have one type of a setup. If you want to do planetary imaging, that's a completely different type of astrophotography. Ironically, a lot more expensive in terms, because you need to then with planetary imaging, you really need to have like a 9.5-inch telescope. So if you can think of Father Tim's telescopes, or the 9.5-inch from the Vatican Observatory that they use for the conference, then all of a sudden, now you're talking some serious money. Um, Also, this sounds kind of silly. Do you like being outdoors? For the places I go to do astrophotography, you hear some bangs and pings and growls in the night. Does that bother you? Do you live in a place where being out at night is safe? Those are good questions for you. Do you need to take a friend with you? Do you need to, like for me, I'm to the point where I'm kind of getting to that age where if ever, like if I was doing astrophotography next to a field, and if I'd hear a snort in the cornfield, I'd think, it's just a buck that's not happy that I'm there. Um, Now I'm starting to think maybe I should get some bear spray. It's basically, kind of like a low grade mace that doesn't hurt animals. Just you got to think through some of those things sometimes, and how adventurous does your outdoors situation allow you to be? Now, oftentimes, like for me, I live in a what's called a Bortle 5 sky, which is pretty light polluted, but I can still with filters do astrophotography from my home, but nothing beats a dark sky. And then lastly, what do you plan to use these images for? Before you even look at gear, answering these questions honestly can really help you to determine what you want to image. So again, a good reference for you to look at is to what are the conditions of your skies. Down here are the different Bortle classes. So I mentioned I'm a Bortle class 5. That's right here. That's right on the border between amazing skies and milk. And so with filters, I just live in the city in an area where I can still do just enough. And so therefore, there's a link here. I'm recording the screen, I can't open it, but there's many dark sky finder sites out there that are worth looking into. What is the Bortle class that you live in? Does it allow you to do photography, the kind of photography you want? If you live in a Bortle 8 or 9, good luck trying to get a picture of the Milky Way core. That's what this image is of. And here's the core here, if you kind of think of a little slash straight line through here. If you live in a Bortle 4 or have fun. And so therefore, it doesn't pay to buy gear if you can't use it. And so therefore, again, the best gear to buy is the gear you're going to use. Um, so also too, we can look at astral landscaping. Are you somebody that like with this you don't need a telescope for to take a picture of the Milky Way. You need a camera with about a 16, 18, 20 millimeter lens on it. Basically, to be quite frank, with a lens with a similar width of your smartphone. And believe it or not, you can take Milky Way core images, and I shared with you, I did a video on that on my Vatican Observatory fanboy YouTube channel. You can do that. That's within your ability with just your smartphone. It isn't going to be the greatest picture. You can't do much with it editing, but you can do nice images with that. Or do you want to really do an astrophotographer of the night sky objects? As taking portraits of nebula and so forth. Or do you want to be an astroscientist, taking images that yield useful scientific data? How you answer these questions is going to be important to, again, understand what kind of equipment you need to approach astrophotography. My problem is my answers to these questions are yes, yes, and yes. So that doesn't help me out. So I would say with astroscience, do you need to buy gear to do astroscience? Actually, I would say no, and this is where I would recommend something like a citizen science program that you can do for free. One of them is Zooniverse, ZOONIVERSE.org. I believe I spelled that properly. It's a great, great porthole for doing citizen science. And one of my favorite things to do is to find supernova candidates. And I have been happy to report that through Zooniverse, and also with their different assistant science programs, my name is now on three current citizen science program supernovae candidates. And basically, what it is, and here's just like a little picture of my profile on Zooniverse. And here's the scientific images of the candidates that I submitted. Basically, what this was is a whole group of us were invited to plow through a ton of images. And if we thought and they did a little training on what is a supernova candidate and what isn't. And then we would just submit images. And if we were one of the first three of the group to submit images to this observational group in Hawaii that was looking at this, and they decided to present it as a candidate, our names would be on part of the collaboration team of the observatory to help find these supernovae. It is fun to do those things. If you like to play cell phone games, Zooniverse projects might be your thing. And it also, too, reminds me of that need if we really want to enter into a dialogue of faith and science. It's often said of Thomas Aquinas, one of the real genius moves he did with the Summa Theologica is that when he extracted Aristotle from the Muslim scholars of the time, the moderate Muslim scholars of Avicenna and so forth, he could argue Aristotle with Muslim scholars as good as they could. Now, I'm not as good as a professional scientist talking about astronomy, but I think that it's a good reminder for us that as Christians, we should be willing to walk in the world of science and do science, understand how the science of astronomy works, so that we can have a sense of humility in those discussions to not just jump to armchair quarterback presumptions on things, but really be in a situation where we can make make a contribution ourselves. Hold on, somebody's coming to my door. Oh, my staff's coming in. If you could give me just 2 minutes, I'm finishing. You can sit and listen in. I'm recording my last presentation for the conference down in Tucson.
Okay.
So as I'm recording this, my staff is coming in for our staff meeting. Now, so just to finish my presentation here for you, what do I recommend for you to purchase? I'll just go through this quick. My gut tells me the vast majority of you, if you've never done astrophotography before, I would encourage you to do like the Dwarf 2 smart telescopes or the ZWO or ZWO, depending on what country you're from, the S series. Those can basically utilize your cell phone and provide you with smart telescopes are basically cell phones on steroids. And so these can be great ways to enter into astrophotography. I have a Dwarf 2 that I absolutely love. I'm probably going to get a Dwarf Mini. If you are like me, you don't have a lot of time to build like a massive astrophotography rig, but that you want to uh, just have something where if you have an hour or two a night, set it up and try to get a picture of like the Orion Nebula. This is what I would recommend. Here's an example of 20 minutes of data collected of the Orion Nebula on my little Dwarf 2. Not the greatest image, but pretty nice what you can get. 40-minute exposure, come in, of the Horsehead Nebula. Howdy, the rest of my staff is coming in. I'm recording a presentation for Arizona, so I'm almost done. Here's a 40-minute exposure of the flame in the Horsehead Nebula. And then, as I've been making and sending you those short little videos on editing, so I can skip that. So, questions to think about as you finish up with your faith in astronomy, or excuse me, your ACME workshop. Why are you passionate about astronomy? What has this week created in you in terms of a renewed passion for astronomy? Why are you passionate about your faith? What have you learned through this week about your faith life that can help you as you leave Arizona this week? And what are opportunities in your ministerial professional environment where you can become a bridge between faith and science? That's the one thing that, the big question of the day, what's the bridge between faith and science? You are. Because, as I mentioned before, faith and science is something that the human person does. It's not something that's an external reality. So you be that bridge. And so therefore I would ask you then, again, if you didn't have a chance, sadly I wasn't down in Arizona. I always encourage you to take some holy risks and ask me questions about faith and science. But you have my contact info, and I would love to speak with you in the future about your questions about faith and science. So again, how can I summarize Pope Francis's proposed works of mercy, of the spiritual work of mercy of contemplating creation and caring for creation? Do faith and do science. They are not enemies. They are a part of who we are, and they are a part of the human experience. Thank you, and may you enjoy safe travels back to your home. And as you heard, my staff has now surrounded me in my house with my leg propped up, and I need to get to my staff meeting. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoy this video.